knows a lot about all kinds of stuff. Professor Dave explains.
As the idealist process of conciliating previous philosophical conceptions into a revised theory occurred in the 18th century, this also happened in that same century within political philosophy. Previous theories were criticized, developed, and thoroughly refined toward new possibilities. Let's now analyze some of these positions that arose up until the end of the 19th century. One noteworthy representative of the new areas of intellectual research was Mary Wollstonecraft in the late 18th century, mother of Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, author of Frankenstein, the foundational literary work of horror and science fiction about the scientific method. Wollstonecraft is considered one of the founding authors of the feminist movement, and wrote much regarding the supposed neutrality of philosophical and political theories of her time. With all sciences still being male-dominated and women still lacking many basic rights that men already had for centuries, Wollstonecraft criticized the supposed rational faculties and so-called humanist principles, which either were clearly directed only at men or left women out indirectly. She performed a kind of practical empiricism in that her own experiences as a woman highlighted the discrepancies of the purported neutral university of many philosophical theories. Though rationality was not exclusive to men, women seldom received the equivalent education, if any, and were thus reduced to an inferior emotional role, a contrast completely ignored from the purportedly humanist and progressive views of the time, which, as we've seen with Kant, more often than not excluded women and other minority groups from the rational person class. Jeremy Bentham was also an empiricist during the late 18th and early 19th centuries, and similarly to Wollstonecraft, he thoroughly intertwined his ethical and epistemological methods with his political theory, however in a more theoretical manner. According to him, legal sciences should be conducted similarly to medical sciences. As an empiricist, the intellect can only perceive and work with material, sensorial input, and likewise only observable and verifiable facts should be considered in matters of legislation. Although elements of utilitarianism were present in previous theories, as in Epicureanism and some of his contemporaries, Bentham used it to propose what would become the main form of the theories to come, and also applied it to his political philosophy, to this day one of the three main ethical schools, along with deontology and virtue theory. Like the other utilitarians of his time, he identified pleasure with what is good, and thus all human actions and legislations should be focused on maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain for the most people, or as he said, the greatest happiness of the greatest number. These and also all duties, rights, and other human political enterprises could be quantifiable and mathematically calculated in order to objectively obtain the best course of action. An obligation could be considered in terms of the pains that acting differently would cause to others, for example. Thus he developed the Panomion, a thorough code of law based on utility, but also ranging widely in framework dealing with ontology, administration, judicial reform, logic, and several other areas. John Stuart Mill, another naturalistic empiricist, followed this politically progressive trend very much in the vein of Wollstonecraft, thanks to his wife Harriet Taylor Mill, arguing against racism, slavery, and gender inequality, and for the humanity of enslaved people, stating that the only tangible difference between people are due to a lack of education and proper opportunity, going as far as being the first British congressman to propose women's suffrage, meaning the right to vote. His family was friends with Bentham, and he developed many of Bentham's utilitarian and empirical ideas. While Bentham focused on the intensity and duration of pleasures in his utilitarian calculus, Mill turned his eye to its quality, claiming the intellectual pleasures were of the highest sort. He also centered his theory on more practical grounds given his parliamentary status, proposing many laws which would take several years to be accepted, and appointing any form of restriction to individual freedom as tyranny, so much so that society took the back seat to the individual itself in his theory, embracing the revolutionary ideals of his time toward defining the state's purpose as that of guaranteeing autonomy and providing aid for the individual to decide their own life, allowing for the general good and thus the harmony and benefit of the entire society. Finally, one of the most controversial figures in modern political philosophy was Karl Marx. While he is best known for his work in history and the social sciences, he had a philosophical background in training and writing, focusing first on the concept of alienation of the individual from the rest of the workings of society. Like Wollstonecraft, he criticized the supposed progression and advancements of the Enlightenment era, claiming that this alienation was a societal ill arising from an ever-growing drive for profit in the capitalist system. As work became more specialized with several new technologies and a wider workforce, the individual was alienated from the property they labored on. No longer did a shoemaker make shoes or an apple farmer sell apples, but several workers in a shoe factory or a large farm generated surplus goods indirectly, selling not a product but their own labor. This led further to his historical materialism, akin to the empirical take on understanding the world, and directly criticizing Hegel's conception of societal evolution. The abstract, ideal dialectical process Hegel defended gave way to a material dialectic, based on the actual existing material world we live in and experience every day. The thesis and its other steps, then, could be understood as the actual modes of production of the markets of a society, instead of metaphysical, detached laws of a mysterious nature. The alienation of the workers from what they themselves produce subjugates them to a lower role in society, as replaceable fodder for the profit of those above them. Thus, it leads to the lack of awareness of these differences, or what Marx calls the classes. There is the proletariat, or these workers which are below the capitalists, also called bourgeois, those who own the means of production where the former work in. The average blue-collar, like janitors, factory workers, drivers, essentially any wage earner, would be workers of the proletariat, while the owners of industries, bankers, landlords, and the like would be the capitalist bourgeois. Capitalism is centered on the maintenance of the bourgeois through the exploitation of the working class, similar to feudalism and other previous economic models, and alienation is a crucial aspect of its function because it limits the understanding of the proletariat that their workforce itself has in fact the highest value of anything in society, what he called surplus value, as it is through their hands that any industry and business can work, having much more value than the executive positions of capitalists, which only give orders and profit from what the proletariat produces. Thus, he proposed that nascent awareness of this world eventually led to a revolution, as a synthesis, with the capitalists as a thesis and the proletariat as an antithesis, where the proletariat would govern society toward a more democratic and just mode of production that is guided by a sense of community. This proposition was the invention of so-called communism, though it did not delineate any blueprints for such a society, as it had never happened before. Rather, it would develop as an undetermined historical process, as came to happen in several different forms, starting just some 30 years after Marx's death and continuing until today. Clearly, the modern period in politics and philosophy set the stage for the current debates and developments of our contemporary world. Everything we now have, from legislation to scientific methodology, which allowed for further rights, conceptual rigor, technological advancements, greater equality, better health standards, and much more, are due to humanist intellectual and societal revolutions of the modern era. They were, however, not without issue, as they trotted through these uncharted intellectual territories, and contemporary philosophy arose as we attempted to organize and adapt these ideas to the ever-growing complexity of the world that modernity itself brought on. The next tutorials will be the final ones covering the modern period, regarding authors in between modernity and the current era in philosophy.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to my channel for more tutorials. Support me on Patreon so I can keep making content. And as always, feel free to email me, ProfessorDaveExplains@gmail.com.